Hello. No, that's not the intro I'm doing. Welcome back to another video here on the channel. My name is Wiley, and in today's video, I'll be covering a few study tips that you can do to actually remember what you're studying. And I'm not just talking about the standard flashcards, Quizlet type thing. Yes, those are strategies that you can do, and yes, I'll mention those later in this video. But I also have some other tips that I think are really going to help you guys actually be able to recall the information that you studied when you're on a test. And I figured that this would be a good video to do because AP tests are coming up around the corner. You know, I know you guys are probably stressing out about them a little bit, so I figured why not just spread some joy here with some studying techniques. I don't really know if those are considered to be joy, but I'm spreading information that should help you. Also, I'm trying to get to 400 subscribers by the end of the semester, so please subscribe. It would mean so much to me. And yeah, let's get on to it. The first one here, I'm gonna sound like a broken record because I know that all of your teachers have told you this. I know that every other video on YouTube that you've watched about studying techniques has told you this, but you really want to be practicing that active recall. Stop rereading and rewriting and start recalling, because being able to not only write down in like a page in your notebook what you learned from class, but also being able to close your notebook without looking at any of the notes you took and just say out loud what you learned is going to be so helpful. It's going to show that yes, you do remember what you learned from class, but you're able to recall it and thus able to apply it to a question on a test or in an essay or something, depending on what class you're in. And this is the step where you can use Quizlet and flashcards and that type of thing, and it'll help you recall because you're not directly looking at the information. Maybe with like a flashcard, you have a prompt that will lead you to the information. Ultimately, you know, the hope is that you don't need a flashcard to remember everything. So just keep going until you get to that point, or until you feel like you definitely know the information well enough that if you're prompted, you can recall what it is. Number 2 is spaced repetition. I know I talked about this in a prior video and pretty much every video, but just taking time in between when you study is going to be so helpful for remembering information. I remember back in, I think it was probably sophomore, junior year when I discovered this, and originally I had just like crammed in 8 hours of studying over the weekend and just been like, okay, you know, I should be good now that I studied 8 hours. I covered all the units, you know, it should be okay. And then I would get to the test and I would kind of just brick it. Wasn't really sure what was going on half the time. I still got an okay grade, but you know, maybe I needed to do some test corrections or something. And then I started spacing out my studying, and instead of doing 8 hours over the weekend, I did maybe 2 hours every other day the week before. And then I got to the test. Now I'm in junior year and I was way more satisfied with my original performance. I was not having to do test corrections anymore. I felt less stressed about studying when I was actually in the process of studying. I felt less stressed during the test. I felt less stressed after the test before I got my score back. It's a whole thing. So just take your time studying, space it out. It's better for your mind. It's better for your mental health. I promise you it'll be better. This next step can kind of be tied in with that spaced repetition. It's called chunking. Essentially what you want to do is break down your studying into chunks, I guess, if it's not obvious from the title of this. For example, I'll use myself back again in sophomore year when I was taking Intro to Psychology. My professor, my teacher, I guess, back then in high school, my teacher was very lecture heavy. She would lecture the entire time. She had a million Google slideshows ready to go off the rip, and I would just sit there and I would lose my mind over how boring they were. But I knew that when I got home, I had to go through and take notes on all of them or study them for the test. So what I would try to do is I would literally just try to get it all done in one period of time. And although the spaced repetition does help with that a little bit, chunking is slightly different. Essentially, I would break up those slideshows into different parts, maybe 3 slides at a time. I would take down the notes for the 3 slides, and then bouncing back to tip 1, I would try to do an active recall on those slides, just shutting my notebook and trying to say out loud, okay, can I actually define these terms that I learned 10 minutes ago? Can I remember? What can't I remember? And just figuring out from there, and then going back and relearning that and doing that process until those 3 slides are locked in my memory, until they are so nailed down that I will never forget them in my life. Number 4 is going to be the Feynman technique, and this again goes back to that active recall. And I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I'm trying to connect all of my points in this video. The Feynman technique says that when you can do active recall to yourself, then go find someone else and try to teach them about what you learned. Let them ask you questions, because then it shows that you are ready to adapt. You're ready to apply the information that you are now able to recall to a question that maybe it will be on the test. Maybe it's a question that kind of just gets you thinking about the information, and being able to do that, it helps you relate the information to something in your mind. Okay, I don't know if that made much sense, relating information in your mind. What I mean by that is, like, if you're talking about Charles Darwin in your mind, if you're thinking about Charles Darwin and you're trying to remember a certain date or something about his theories or something, and you think back to a time when you were talking to your parents about Charles Darwin, then you have that memory to go off and you can kind of remember that conversation with your parents. So by teaching people about the information that you learned, you are in a way kind of giving your mind these timestamps of memories so it can go back and remember more clearly about that subject. Number 5, and this one is kind of the overarching one for if you're studying multiple subjects, and I decided to keep this one for last because I thought that it was the most like umbrella applicative one. But if you have multiple subjects that you're studying, let's say you're in like 3 or 4 APs this year, or you just have some really hard classes and you're taking a lot of those hard classes, you should be switching back and forth between which class you're studying for. You should not be studying for 2 hours straight of biology and then not even touching your algebra or your history studying at all. Maybe you study for half an hour or 45 minutes in biology, then 45 minutes in algebra, and then 45 minutes in history. And that just gives you a more well-rounded out study session, and you're going to feel more confident in the long run about your ability to recall all of the information from those different classes. You also want to be doing practice tests as much as you can because it's going to get you familiar with what is actually on the test. And again, kind of like explaining the topic to someone else, it kind of just helps you be able to adapt the information that you learned and relate it to something else and be able to apply it to something that maybe you hadn't been faced with on the study guide or in your own personal notes. Okay, and then I have 4 very quick things to just run off you guys that I didn't think were big enough to make a whole point of, but I just wanted to touch on them briefly. The first one is the Pomodoro technique. When you're studying, it should be for 25 minutes. You take a 5-minute break, you do 25 minutes again, 5-minute break, that whole thing. I made a whole video on it. It's probably the best study strategy out there in the entire world right now, so I would 100% recommend going to check out that video. Secondly, sleep is non-negotiable. You 100% need your sleep. I don't care if you're studying for a test that's the next day. You should not be staying up until 2 a.m. in the morning when you have a test at like 9 a.m. the next day. It's not going to help you at all. In fact, it's going to hurt you. You're not going to be able to recall any of the information that you crammed the last night. It's really, really, really not going to help you, and I urge you strongly that you should get the full night of sleep. Number 3 is you should stay focused and not multitask. Other than that 5-minute break I talked about in the Pomodoro technique, you should not be looking at your phone. You should not be doing anything else other than studying for those 25 minutes or however long you decided is your attention span worth of studying uninterrupted. There should be no TikTok, no FaceTimes, no shows or anything. You just lock in and you get that work done until the timer goes off, and you can take that short break or do whatever. All right, my last one is just to start early. Start studying early. When you know you have a test in a few weeks, start today. All right, even if it's only for 10, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes today, just start reviewing material you've already learned. And that way, eventually 15 minutes a day will add up. You already feel pretty confident about the information that you've been reviewing every day. And then it comes to the test time, it comes ready to study, but you've already done it. And then you feel less stressed, you have more time on your hands. Hopefully you guys can take some of these tips and apply them to your actual, situations in real life and really remember what you're studying. If that works, let me know down below. I would love to see any and all of your comments/feedback, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.